When it comes to Hayao Miyazaki, there's a general claim or criticism that I hear often enough that it is noteworthy. It has to do with the way he ends his stories. Essentially, it seems people can be thrown off by the abrupt end to his movies. And I agree, his movies do end rather quickly. There's usually only a few minutes at most dedicated to what we would think of as the resolution, and then it's over. Now, let's not be too quick to make conclusions, unlike Miyazaki. Hayao Miyazaki is obviously a Japanese storyteller, and while he takes inspiration from many places, his basic story structure aligns closer to the Kishōtenketsu model for storytelling than anything else. Now, what is Kishōtenketsu? You're probably aware of the three-act structure, which relies on exposition, inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Kishōtenketsu is different. It starts off with the setup, which is familiar enough, but the second act is development. It does not rely on conflict. It can have conflict, but it doesn't need it. Development is simply expanding what we already know, or showing change in the situation. The next act is the twist, when something completely unexpected happens to the story that changes how it is perceived. It doesn't need to be anything earth-shattering, but it can be. The final act of this four-act structure is the conclusion. In Kishōtenketsu, there's not strong demand for character growth and change like a three-act structure, nor does it hold close to a falling action resolution model. It is just the end of the story, basically showing what happened after the twist. Keep in mind, there's plenty of variation within this model, and it can be broken in unique ways like a three-act structure can be. However, it does serve as a good general structure for a story. Let's see this played out in an example. Let's take Miyazaki's 1989 film Kiki's Delivery Service and examine it under the Kishōtenketsu microscope. We have the initial introduction of Kiki. She is a witch going out into the world as per tradition. We come to understand very quickly the dynamic between her and her cat, her powers and her limitations. Next, we enter the development part of the story. She leaves home and finds a new city and meets new people. Her situation changes as now she is a delivery worker. See, there is no conflict that makes this happen. That's not to say the film is without it altogether, just that it doesn't push the overarching narrative in this case. In my interpretation, the twist in the story is when Kiki suddenly loses her powers. We, the audience, aren't even aware that this is something that can happen to witches, but thematically, it asks the viewer to completely rethink the story. Now the question isn't how do I get by, but rather, why do I even like the things that I do? The conclusion is Kiki finding her powers again to save someone she cares about. However, with Jiji still being silent, we see the twist has changed things forever. This is very general, but I think the point has been put across. Essentially what I'm saying is that it is possible that when we expect the three-act structure way of telling a story, we can be thrown off when presented with something different, even when that different concept on its own isn't any better or worse. Regardless though, the criticism can still stand, so I want to look at the endings to all of Miyazaki's feature films and look at them through my own lens to see if I think their endings bring out the themes of the story and conclude things in a proper, let's say, not rushed way. The ending of the Castle of Cagliostro is very fun for sure. It definitely takes the characters back to how we know them at the beginning, and since it is a franchise, that is to be expected. Lupin leaving behind the princess does reflect the amount he has matured over the course of the movie, refusing to bring her into his life of crime, while simultaneously reinforcing the fact that Lupin is a goofy guy that just can't help but be a lovable criminal. Overall, I don't find anything about this ending to have happened too quickly or out of left field. Everything that happens is established and all the plot details are generally either wrapped up or end on a satisfying enough note. Valley of the Wind. This is a good one, because it does end very abruptly. Right after Nausicaa pacifies the Ohms, the story ends immediately. We are left to see the consequences played out through the credits. If anyone is wondering, the manga is way longer and goes in a completely different direction, but its ending too is abrupt. What I see in this film is Miyazaki ending his stories where he sees fit. Tim, the aftermath doesn't need to be played out because at this point we all get what's happening. The invading kingdom goes away because their princess is chill with Nausicaa after what happened in the jungle, and everyone just has to get together and work again after all that destruction that occurred. but I think that we, the audience, are not left in the dust here. There isn't anything here that relates to the story itself we've been seeing that needs to happen, so this ending is undeniably abrupt, but it isn't rushed, and I don't think that abrupt means bad, it's just a way to end things. There isn't much for me to say about Castle in the Sky. Yeah, it ends with Sheeta and Pazu going off on their own, presumably back to the mining town he started from, or Sheeta's farm again. Probably the latter, actually. And the pirate gang is all fine. I mean, the ending is only really bad for the thousands upon thousands of soldiers that died. But besides that, there isn't anything to point to. I don't feel that anything feels particularly abrupt or unanswered. Just like with the last film, they both play off environmental and anti-war themes, and I do not think either film contradicts these themes with their endings, but instead reinforces Miyazaki's worldview of pacifism and being respectful towards nature, by letting nature live without being damaged by humanity, which as we see damages humanity in return, and the characters finding peace, more so in Valley of the Wind, by not defeating each other, but in coming to understand each other, something that ends the cycle of violence instead of continued fighting, which never ends in a complete defeat as seen in Asbel, who keeps the fight up long after his kingdom has essentially been wiped out. My Neighbor Totoro, I really don't think there's any other way for this film to end. I think it is okay to find the plot point of Mei going missing to be debatable as to whether or not it was needed to be in the story, but I think it reinforces the themes really well and the place of Totoro in the film. The themes in this one are very directed at the young audience, and it seems more than anything to just say that everything will be okay. The adults in the movie immediately assume the worst when Mei goes missing, and we see that Satsuki has taken on this adult worry as well, because it is her immediate worry that her mother has died or will die, is what drives Mei to her actions. Totoro shows up to be an almost childish force, but in their immediate action, they and the Kappas find Mei easily, and even deliver the corn to her mother, who we see is actually just fine. The pair return home, and through credit illustrations we see that their mother does eventually come home too. Overall, this ending brings together what Miyazaki was saying, that things can and do get better, while simultaneously understanding the circumstances that lead us to think otherwise. Totoro is a weird character for sure. They don't say anything, nor is their exact purpose in the story all that clear. They serve as a respite of the girl's fears, but there is an open-endedness to them that is not laziness on the writing's part, but actually a genius way to think about our own emotions and our expressions of them. I think what Totoro is a little different for everyone, and that's part of what makes them so amazing. Alright, Kiki's delivery service. We kind of just discussed this one, but I will say that I am aware that the Zeppelin plot point, it kind of just happens. Not that I mind it when things just happen, I love it. Just not so much in this case. Yes, it is set up and neither does it ruin the experience for me, but admittingly it's a little contrived. Not his most genius moment. See, Kiki needs her power back, but it isn't coming back to her. Her artist friends suggest taking it easy, which is a great message. When we lose motivation, it's better to take it easy instead of trying to force it to happen. Hence, with the Zeppelin, yes, it works, but it does become an immediate threat that forces her to regain her powers. Then again, I see the counter-argument that sometimes you just need to know what's at stake, or what the end goal really is to get motivation back, whereas her previous use of her power was leading her to dead ends and misgivings. Even after this, I do like that her communication with Jiji is cut off, but the relationship isn't. I like the understanding that some things are lost as we age and are irretrievable. Then again, I know Miyazaki once said in regards to this, about that scene, it was that there was nothing to be said. So there is interpretation. But in regards to the ending itself, it is not abrupt. In fact, this is probably Miyazaki's most resolute resolution, continuing through the credits and the after credits scene where her family reads her letter as she looks back on her experiences. I can't say it is rushed at all. It takes its time, and for a movie that takes its time with most of its themes, I believe this is the ending that it needed. Porco Rosso. This is just a fun one, hands down. I think this is one of the most perfect endings in any Miyazaki film, because it is in itself iconic. I really enjoy that Marco's face is like a little secret. It's not for us, the audience. At the end of the movie, he finally breaks through his crushing guilt and realizes his worth. Once he stops feeling like a pig, well, he isn't a pig anymore. Nothing against pigs. And nothing is put out in front of us, but the fact that Gina isn't seen waiting in the garden for Marco at the end of the movie means that she isn't waiting for him anymore. He must have showed up. That is my interpretation. There isn't anything wrong with this ending, and I enjoy that every character, including Curtis, gets to go on to live a successful and fulfilling life. The movie ends in such a way that is just perfect for it, that I do not see it as rushed or abrupt. Not to say that anyone can't feel that way, I'm just saying what I feel. Princess Mononoke, one of the grandest Miyazaki films out there. I find this to be some of Miyazaki's most genius storytelling. The way he is able to combine multiple factions, a dozen and more characters and themes ranging from war to nature, and have it all come together in the ending is absolutely stunning. I think this is when Miyazaki gets back into that sudden and abruptish endings. The film wraps up after witnessing the forest god retrieve its head, and then bring back life to the lands. The life is mostly grass and shrubbery and flowers. I love that it doesn't bring the trees back. Those are plants that will need more time to develop and grow. I like that San is willing to give up on the whole killing Lady Eboshi thing, but she says she will never forgive the humans. This is among Miyazaki's darker films, and to see San still reject humanity for what they did to her is a realistic loose end. Personally, I always wondered if Ashitaka would ever return to his homeland, but that remains untold. Once again, Miyazaki ends his stories not based on catering to the audience, but to the story itself. I believe that most of Miyazaki's stories end where they end in his mind. He can't write any more past that, but this is just speculation. Overall, we get to see all the characters like Eboshi and Jikobo still kicking and ready to get going, and I think that's why this ending really works. We know this film has anti-war and pro-environment messages, but I want to focus on what I think is the main theme here of persevering, as one character in the film says, and yet we keep finding reasons to live. The end of this movie shows all the characters still neck deep in problems, but they are all renewed and ready to continue pushing forward for themselves and others, and that is inspiring. Everything was destroyed, but there's new growth, a new life. The ending works is all I'm saying. Next we have Spirited Away. This is the film that definitely put Ghibli on the map outside of Japan and the United States. It really made this studio a household name, which is why I hypothesize that this may be where Miyazaki gets his association with abrupt endings. Right after Chihiro completes her final test, she runs off with Haku, and once past him, she reunites with her parents. They drive away together, and that's where the movie ends. When I think of the contained nature of this film, it makes sense we won't see Chihiro at her new school just like we don't see her at her old school. This is just one in-between story in her life. Like all of Miyazaki's films, you get a distinct impression that these characters' lives are continuing after the credits roll. We feel the weight of the future combined with the longing for a past that can't happen again. Yet when I think of this film, I think of memory. It's a big theme in this movie, from Chihiro's friend from her old school leaving her a card so she can remember her own name, or Chihiro remembering Haku's name, to even Zeniba telling her that once you meet someone you will never forget them. When Chihiro leaves the spirit world just as suddenly as she entered, we still see she has her new hairband made by her friends, and how much she remembers of the spirit world doesn't matter so much because the impression of all those she met is going to continue with her. With Spirited Away, it doesn't fit any easy model. Will being at a new school still prove difficult for her? Well, yes, probably. But what I get from this ending is a feeling I relate to when I have to leave a place that I've come to really enjoy with people I know I won't see again in a long while. It always feels sudden and too quick. But with plot threads like No Face wrapped up long before the ending and Aku freed, it's a good ending. But it's Miyazaki. The angle of the story isn't, a fight between Chihiro and Yubaba. It's more than that. So with Lin and Kamaji, I can only hope that they continue getting on fine. But with the goals this movie set off to accomplish, it didn't miss anything. Howl's Moving Castle. Before The Boy and the Heron, I'd say this was the most Miyazaki film of all films. What I love about this movie is that emotion takes the front seat here, while logic is basically thrown completely out of the window. And it is the best. This is an amazing ending through and through. It's Miyazaki at his best when the movie ends with the idea of love being so strong that it can break through any barrier, whether that be in war, magical spells, or even in time. In the book, Sophie is a witch. She finds this out, but I like in Miyazaki's interpretation that Sophie never actually finds out if she is a witch or not. Not that it is a concern to her really, both book and movie, but in the end her love is just so powerful that she can retrieve Howl's heart from the Witch of the Waste, give his heart back while saving Howl's fur, and she can even free Prince Justin from his scarecrow spell and ends the war. The complete fluidity of this ending is just groundbreaking in storytelling. I love it because I don't get the feeling that anything is contrived. I just feel that this is the way it is supposed to happen. And that's what I think is the strongest theme in Howl's Moving Castle. It's the power of love. That our relationships are part of us and are not what drags us down, but what makes us. So seeing all the characters living together is the perfect way to end this already brilliant film. Ponyo! This is such a sweet film. It may have one of Miyazaki's most abrupt endings. There's not even an credit or after credit scene to put anything into context. But the conclusion is Ponyo's choice. The twist in this film is the rising seas and the moon closing in on Earth. Sosuke and Ponyo are the only ones who can fix that, and it is their choice that fixes things. That Ponyo will become a human, and Sosuke wants Ponyo to be a human. We see them live out their adorable lives together, where Ponyo finds out more and more aspects of being a human, and loves it. So the film's message is that being a human and being alive is actually a really good thing. This ending reaffirms it beyond any shadow of a doubt, and I like seeing all the old ladies feeling young again. The Wind Rises. What was meant to be the finale of the long career of Hayao Miyazaki. This film's ending is definitely among the most interesting. This movie is of such literary value it is absurd. The film ends in a dream that takes place at least almost a decade after the last scene we had just witnessed, which is the successful first flight of the Zero plane, an act that was overshadowed by the death of Jiro Horikoshi's wife Nahoko. At the start of this dream, we see the dream planes fly off, being covered in the dark smoke rising from a burning city. As planes fire at each other, refugees watch on as the scene unfolds. We then see Horikoshi walking through a field of crashed planes with vegetation growing on them. Then we see the familiar face of Caproni, a presence we haven't seen for quite a while in this film. What I love about this scene is that it cuts past all the war and the desperate attempt by the Japanese military and government to keep fighting or to defend the islands. It just cuts to the inevitable consequences of the nationalist rising in Japan. The ordinary everyday people have to see everything burnt to the ground. Horikoshi has to live with the fact that none of his planes have returned. There is no victory here, no silver lining. The situation is presented flat out. It is an honest depiction of the destructive power of war and the dangers of a militaristic government, especially one held to no standards. We went through the entire film seeing the pride taken in the beauty of airplanes, the creation of something that flies, but in the end it was used in destruction. The justifications for it became flimsy and broke easily. Yet even in the end, Nahoko tells her husband to continue to live, to push on, because we have to, even despite these devastating losses. So in telling us that the end of the war is meaningless and telling us to push on in such a dreamy, surreal way, I say this ending does its job. And now, the end to the ending. When I think about The Wind Rises, it felt like a long goodbye, and that may just be because of how I viewed it in my own sense of time. Yet with this next film, it felt like he had come back suddenly, like after saying goodbye to a relative you won't see for a while, but they come back a minute later because they forgot their car keys. Of course, Miyazaki wasn't going to leave, he never leaves. Then again, this may very well be it, his final movie. We know that he isn't exactly retired, but that doesn't mean he is actually working on another feature film. I hope he continues doing what he loves for as long as possible. But there is something so surreal about The Boy and the Heron. It is such a personal movie. It completely goes against what we know Miyazaki's films to be like. Our protagonist is shy and doesn't interact with others. He suffers and he doesn't push through with the death of his mother like other Ghibli characters have. It sticks with him the entirety of the film. There isn't a scene where it isn't weighing on him. He even gets into fights, and it's not like Jiro Horikoshi where he is standing up for someone else. He is selfish sometimes, he steals, he closes himself off. Mahito is a more truthful version of Miyazaki, the person he actually used to be and still is, someone who is flawed and has malice. And that isn't a dig, it's something that is true with everybody. Mahito finds his beliefs and the love of nature and the ideals of pacifism instead of starting off with them. There's nothing idealized about him. This isn't to say that none of the previous protagonists were flawless, just that there's something extra to Mahito. The ending of the film takes place 2 years later after everything else. The narration returns for the first time since the beginning, where he tells us he is going back to Tokyo. His parents are waiting for him downstairs, where his new younger sibling is already standing up. Mahito has grown slightly, and he packs his bag with the book How Do You Live, the book which is the childhood favorite of Hayao Miyazaki, before setting off, closing the door on an empty room. One that we know has so much meaning but is now left behind. When Miyazaki was asked if he knew the answer to How Do You Live, he said he was making the film because he didn't know. How you live is a question that is asked again every day. It is a question we have to keep asking every day because no one answer can fit it. This ending shows someone allowing their past to be a part of them while managing to keep going every day. The message of the movie isn't to answer the question, it's just to keep asking it, because if you do, then you will be alive.